Welcome to Pottery. Before we start working with clay, let's learn more about it. Clay is the media we use in pottery. But what does that mean? Media means material. In drawing class, you might use pencil or charcoal, but in pottery, we will be using clay. We have two types of clay in pottery, but we'll get to that later. Clay is made from dirt and water, but it's different from mud because it has plasticity. Plasticity is what holds the clay together, but it also gives the clay a memory. So you want to try to make your project as best you can the first time around, because if you have to start over again, the clay will be harder to work with. Another media we will use is slip. Slip is clay and water. When clay gets too dry, you can put it in the slip bucket. There's one at the sink and two in the kiln room. The slip bucket absorbs the clay and softens it again. We will pull slip out of the bucket to use it like glue on our projects. We also recycle it by putting it in the pug mill. The pug mill turns slip into clay that we use for throwing. There are several different types of clay. The most common are porcelain, stoneware, and earthenware. Porcelain fires at a high temperature, about 2300 degrees. It's very smooth and white after it's been fired. Have you ever heard of a porcelain doll? They are called porcelain dolls because their faces are made out of porcelain. Stoneware is another type of common clay. It is sometimes fired at low temperatures and sometimes fired at high temperatures. Stoneware often contains iron, which gives it a red color. Earthenware is the last type of common clay, and it is the kind we use. Earthenware fires at a low temperature, between 1000 and 2000 degrees. We fire our clay at 1800 degrees. It's normally a gray color, but turns white after it's been fired. Now that we've talked about clay and slip, let's look at some tools you'll use in the class. The needle tool is a sharp tool used to score and draw into clay. The carving tool is used to cut and carve into clay. The kidney tool may look familiar to you. You probably used it in intro to smooth out your quail pot. The kidney tool is used to smooth out the clay. Rib tools can be used for just about anything, drawing, carving, and getting into small spots in your project. The ends are all different, so they can be used in several different ways. We have plastic and wood rib tools. All of these tools, plus other tools you might use, are in the pottery cabinet. You can use anything you find in the cabinet while working on your project. So now that we've talked about the tools you'll use, let's talk about the stages of clay. During the process of making a project, your clay goes through 5 stages. It's important to know what stage you're working on so that you'll know what you can and can't do with the clay. Greenware is the first stage of clay, and it's what you call your project when you're working on it. It's wet enough to carve into, add clay to, and draw in. When you're working on your project, you must keep it wrapped up in a bag so that it doesn't dry out. After you've finished, you will take it out of the bag and put it on the shelf in the kiln room so that it can start to dry. After your project has dried for a few days, it will start to look shiny and turn a darker gray color. This is called the leather hard stage. Leather hard clay can be carved into, but it's too dry to attach clay to. After a few more days of drying, about 7 to 10 days total, your project will become bone dry. Bone dry clay means that there is no moisture left in it. It has dried completely, turned a light gray color, and is dusty when you touch it. Clay must be bone dry before it gets fired. If moisture is left in the clay, it will boil, and with no place to go, it will make your project explode. Once your project is bone dry, I will fire it in the kiln. The kiln takes 24 hours to fire and cool down. Once I take it out of the kiln, it is in the bisqueware stage. Bisqueware is clay that's been fired once. It is very porous and will be much lighter than it was before it was fired. Let's stop here and talk about a very important rule involving bisqueware. Bisqueware cannot go back in the slip bucket. After clay has been fired, it cannot turn back into slip, much like cookies cannot turn back into cookie dough after they've been baked. If you get a piece of bisqueware back from me and a piece falls off of it, you can decide to keep it or throw it in the trash can. If you put it in the slip bucket, it will get recycled into throwing clay and probably hurt somebody. Now that we've talked about that very important safety rule, we can talk about the last stage of clay. When you get your bisqueware back, you will glaze it. When you're done glazing it, you will put it back on the shelf in the kiln room, and I will fire it. After it's been fired, it's called glazeware. It's done and ready to be used. Let's do a quick review. The first stage of clay is called greenware, and it's what you call your project when you're working on it. After it's dried out a few days, it's in the leather hard stage. You can no longer attach clay to it. Once it's completely dry and there's no moisture left, it's in the bone dry stage. Then I will fire it, and it's called bisqueware. After it's been glazed, I will fire it again, and it's called glazeware. Pop quiz! If you finish a project and put it in the kiln room, will you get it back fired the next day?
No!
It takes about 7 days to dry and a full day to fire. The quickest you would see your work fired is 8 days, but 2 weeks is a common time length. So what's all this talk about firing? Firing the kiln makes the clay permanent. Firing is what it's called when the clay is cooked in the kiln. So what is a kiln? Well, there's no fire. A kiln has elements, wires surrounded by porous stone. The elements heat up and the stone holds in the heat. We fire our kiln at 1800 degrees, so when the kiln's on, it gets very hot. If you were to touch the outside of the kiln while it's firing, you would burn yourself. Remember, there are only 2 reasons to go in the kiln room: to put your project on a shelf and to put slip in the slip bucket. And that's some information you need to start pottery. I look forward to seeing the awesome stuff you create in the next 9 weeks.